Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll tell you the story about Agent 00 Java, the exploit with a license to kill, plus Google's creative solution to securing user content, and a big batch of your questions and our answers. All that and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 73 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This episode was streamed live on August 30th, 2012, and it's brought to you by GoDaddy.com. I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on, and the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is amazing. Go check it out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for watching.
I was like, are you there, Alan?
Yep, I'm here.
You were reading the chat room, weren't you? I got you. Now, I say this often, Alan. In fact, you might say, I almost say this every episode, but we have a big show. And I can say that because the show notes are 5 freaking pages long.
The interesting thing is that they were 5 pages when we only had one news article.
Yeah.
And then I added another news article.
It's a big week this week. And I have something kind of fun at the end of the show. I'm going to unbox this. This just arrived right before we went on air. This is my new FreeNAS Mini from IX Systems, and nice. I'm going to take it out of the box at the end of the roundup. So stick around for that. We'll see what it looks like coming out of the box, and I'm pretty excited to put that thing into production. Hopefully, get it in some sort of testing this weekend. Because I tell you what, Jupiter Broadcasting burns through the hard drive space. That's a 12 terabyte unit. Just this episode of TechSNAP alone probably be around 45 gigabytes, and then it gets exported again into a compiled file, which is also then again 45 gigabytes. So it takes up that storage twice. Just think about the production cost just maintaining this network. That brings me to my next topic. Before we jump into our huge news story of this week, I want to remind you that this show and shows like this are supported directly by our audience. In fact, one of the challenges we have at Jupiter Broadcasting is we make shows that are really built for enthusiasts, sort of people in our peer group. And in order to do that, we really have to live this stuff. And, Alan and I, we both come from the industry, right? We don't have a celebrity background where we come from media, and now we're going to talk about technology. We actually work this stuff every single day, and we're relaying our real-life experiences to you. But what that means is the cost of that is we don't have celebrity names that we can go to an advertiser with and say, hi, I'm Celebrity X, and I want to sell your product on my show. Also, because you guys are extra smart and we're hyper-focused, we're not as big of a target for, say, something like Carbonite or something like that, because you guys know about alternative services. You guys know how to get this stuff done, so we're only really applicable to a small subset of advertisers. But that doesn't matter because we get directly sponsored by you, our audience, and as long as you guys continue to support us, well, then, that's all that really matters, and we only have to answer to you. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. One way is the direct method over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate. And we have options there for Amazon subscriptions new, which are kind of nice because I love Amazon, and I think a lot of you also.
The Amazon ones are quite nice.
Yeah. And then we also have the historical PayPal ones there, which the nice thing about the PayPal one right now is you can leave a note on our recognition wall, like plug your site and stuff. We don't have that hooked up to Amazon yet. The other method is while not as direct, it's still a fantastic way to support the network, and that's through our affiliate links at the bottom of the website. You have Amazon US, UK, Amazon DE, Netflix, and Newegg, and ThinkGeek, and Best Buy, and Audible, which I love, Code School, which is amazing for learning programming and learning by doing, Gamefly, and we also have links to our browser extensions. We'll automatically just enable your browser to credit us at the sites that participate. So anyways, thanks. I'll wrap it up at that, but that's just a great way you can keep these shows coming to you, and also helps us keep the sponsorships to a minimum either way. So that's great. All right, Alan, well, should we do our first big news story? The big story of the week? All right, what is the big story?
There's a zero-day exploit in the wild for Java 1.7 or Java 7.
A 0-day. So this is serious.
Yes. Yes, so this is an actively being exploited flaw in Java. So they're actually 2 critical vulnerabilities, and then when you combine them together just right, you can completely bypass the Java sandbox and have unfettered access to the machine that's running the Java.
So the whole point of the sandbox is to prevent something like this.
Yes, and basically, if you exploit this one vulnerability, you can then access this one part that's only supposed to be able to be accessed inside of Java by Java itself. And then the second exploit allows you to just manage to basically build on top of the first exploit and escape the sandbox entirely.
So if I have Java 7 and I have the Java 7 browser plugin,
Yep.
that's essentially all that I need to be qualified. Any platform, or is it specific to Windows?
No, it's not specific to Windows. It works on the Metasploit has working exploit code for Windows and OS 10, and I imagine that means Linux as well.
Speaking of Metasploit, I don't know if you saw this, but I did a live hacking on last week's Last. I compromised a remote. I downloaded that Metasploitable distribution that we've talked about,
Yep.
and I used Metasploit and the Open Vulnerability Assessment tool to remotely compromise the machine in this last week. Last week. So
Sounds like a good episode.
it was fun, yeah. So apparently, if I wanted to take over somebody's machine, maybe this would be a way to do it. Like, what kind of powers do I get? Are we talking like
Basically,
root level?
you would have access to whatever the user that's running the browser does.
Sure. Okay.
So basically, you completely break out of the sandbox and have access to the machine as if you were running exe on the machine.
So can you break it down for me? What's going on here?
Basically, these can also be exploited in what's called a drive-by fashion, meaning that the user doesn't have to do anything in order to initiate this.
Yeah.
So if you go to a website that has an infected applet on it, then you're infected. And whatever payload they
No
issue
clicking,
is
no I accept, no
Exactly.
run, just it runs on its own.
Yep.
Lovely. And there's, like you said, since there's already proof of concepts out there, so this is actually getting taken advantage of today.
Yeah, it's beyond a proof of concept. They're active, like it's included in some vulnerability packs that are actually being used to exploit people's machines.
And Java 6 is not susceptible to this flaw, correct?
Right. Java 6 is not, although Java 6 is old. They don't maintain it anymore, so
Yeah.
it has a bunch of different older vulnerabilities that
exactly.
it's susceptible to, and you should.
So that's not
Probably
exactly
not
a
use
winning
that.
strategy.
Right.
You don't want to go deploy that across your enterprise, because then you just open yourself up to a whole other set of
Of course,
attack vectors.
the biggest fear with something like this is that if the attackers purchase advertising via an ad network, and so it gets deployed on legitimate sites, and then injected the exploit code into the advertisement. This is especially popular with some of the less name brand type of ad networks that run on, sites that are just trying to make as much money as they can.
That's a go-to scenario, but it could be any website that could get code injected.
Right. So the other thing is, this type of exploit will be heavily used on compromised websites, like we saw with Brian's WordPress blog a couple of weeks ago, or we see that research we talked about a little while ago that said you're more likely to get a virus from a religious site than from a porn site. And again, that's because some church is not going to know to update their WordPress to keep it up to date. And so they get exploited, and it adds this little bit of code to the top of their website. You look at the website, it looks like it's fine. It doesn't look like it's been hacked.
Exactly.
But it's actually infecting your computer via this Java exploit.
It can happen. It can be nearly undetectable. In fact, remember, we've even covered Twit TV's been hacked a couple of times. Their Drupal site had code injections done to it, and one of them was spreading malware, sort of like this. So, what's scary about this though is you combine it with the
one
zero.
time that happened to uTorrent's website as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's happened. Yeah. And what's scary about it is that you combine it with the zero requirement of user interaction, so it can just run on its own. That's gnarly. But what I think's even, if you're ready to talk about this, what I think's even more gnarly is it's now coming out. It looks like that Oracle might have known about this vulnerability for a little while.
Yes. So Oracle's reportedly known about the critical Java flaws for more than 4 months. The ones that are just starting to be exploited this week. Basically, a company from Poland called Security Explorations in April reported 29 flaws, they reported 19 and then they subsequently found some more while they were working on it. But basically, since April, they've reported a total of 29 flaws to Oracle and had communications back and forth with Oracle. They also provided not just their bug reports and descriptions of the flaws, but working proof of concept exploit code against each one of the flaws to Oracle. So now they're keeping the proof of concept secret because they don't want these to be exploited, but they provided the proof of concept to Oracle so that they could, fix the bug, see how it's being exploited, and use the proof of concept to make sure that their fixes work.
So 19 vulnerabilities were disclosed in April, proof of concepts, and so do we have a case of extreme negligence on Oracle's part here? Because wasn't it just
it's hard to say.
Last episode I was ranting about the responsibility of the platform owner.
Yep.
And here we go. It's just all over again.
Yeah. So in total, there are 29 different flaws. Oracle fixed 3 of them in the June patch cycle.
Okay.
But the next patch cycle isn't until October.
Although we have a link from the chat room here who has an H on the H online site says Oracle's releasing an emergency fix for Java 0 day. So maybe they're going to step that up and not wait till the next dang cycle.
Yeah, but basically, according to the status report that they had sent to Security Explorations, the company that found the vulnerabilities, on August 23rd, Oracle was planning to fix the two major vulnerabilities and 17 of the other vulnerabilities, plus the 3 they already fixed, would have left about 9 unfixed, although it's not clear if exactly how that works. But
it's like Acrobat recently. Remember Acrobat released their new reader, and there still was like 3 or 4 vulnerabilities they're just not fixing right now? It's egregious, Alan. It's egregious.
Yep.
Well, though it looks like we just saw in the chat room too that somebody else just said that they just got a Java update. So maybe Oracle is jumping on this, which would be great. But it's a little late because it's already
show at the same time. But yes,
it's already being exploited. So this is one of those problems where there's sort of this lag with updates, and once something's already actively being exploited, there's still a long tail window where this is going to be a problem.
Right, but specifically, the major concern here was that Oracle only does their releases every 4 months, and they very, very, very rarely ever do an emergency patch like this. And so there was a lot of concern that they weren't going to do one until October.
Right.
But I think the amount of concern and the active exploits for that caused them to release the new version, and that's like a recent development within the last few hours today that they actually released the update.
Actually, it's very recent. Good. Good.
Like
now,
so recent that the news article people are linking in the chat room didn't exist when I was doing the research for the show.
The problem is Oracle still doesn't get their internet cookie because they knew about this since April. So there's just
so basically these vulnerabilities should have been fixed in the June update and never exploited at all.
Egregious.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this one?
There's a couple actually. Let me just find my place again. Okay, so Adam Godiek, the CEO of Security Explorations, remarked that the exploits that are in the wild combine the 2 vulnerabilities that his company found, but in a different way. Like in their proof of concepts, they used the first vulnerability, combined it with some other stuff to do X, and then the second one combined with some other stuff to do Y, but they never combined the 2 of them together in order to make quite the same exploit.
Yeah.
So owing to the difference in the way that the vulnerabilities were exploited, the Polish company assumes that someone else independently discovered basically the same exploits and then built this exploit that we've seen, rather than them discovering the vulnerability via some leak in the vulnerability reporting handling process at Oracle.
Gotcha.
Right? So they didn't find out about the vulnerability because of the research of the Polish company. But he also adds that we don't know with whom and in what form or detail Oracle is sharing vulnerability information. Right?
As in they might be sharing vulnerabilities in their products with companies and then not fixing them?
Well, not necessarily with companies, but, the government supply of zero-day exploits for things like Stuxnet have to come from somewhere.
Oh, by the way, so speaking of Stuxnet, I am reading a book that came out from a New York Times journalist who actually, it was his book that we actually discovered that was the original revelation of Stuxnet. And I got it's out now and I got it. And remember how we conjectured that it seemed like at the level of access with all the different zero-day exploits they have, they must have worked with Siemens to do that. And that is actually, in fact, the case. It states in the book that the U.S. government did bring in representatives from Siemens who knew about certain vulnerabilities and helped them write their code because due to they had to write the code so specific to those centrifuges not to violate some sort of laws of war that they had to have Siemens come in and help them make sure they were only targeting those systems. But that is a documented case of a commercial manufacturer coming into the U.S. government and disclosing, okay, we know about these vulnerabilities. They are not fixed in these products, and you could write to these. And that's, I think, a pretty big revelation.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of conjecture here that Oracle may have, that this exploit may have actually come from Oracle sharing vulnerability information with someone.
Probably the Canadian government.
That would also might explain why Oracle wasn't planning on fixing it right away. If they were working with someone in order to allow it to be exploited. But once it became publicly available exploit, then they rushed in and got this patch out there.
Good. Maybe next time they'll do it beforehand.
Yeah. Basically, in the meantime, there was a third-party patch that was made.
Yes.
However, it isn't really necessary now.
Not as relevant, but it is funny to see the community do this from time to time.
Yeah. Basically, the original idea here was that they just, developed this patch, but it wasn't available to everyone. It was, you had to email them and ask for it, and they were only going to give it to, IT administrators that needed to protect large enterprises or something.
Seriously?
It really wasn't meant. It wasn't good enough to be able to be used on regular desktops.
Oh, okay, yeah. Microsoft does this. You can call Microsoft and you can get specific hotfixes that aren't published online for stuff, and they'll warn you about it. And in fact, back in the day, that was actually pretty common for a lot of terminal server administrators. Is you would almost always end up inevitably trying to deploy something that you'd have to go get some sort of hotfix, and you'd have to call Microsoft, and you'd have to tell them you weren't going to spread it around. In fact, earlier on, it was actually like you'd almost have to vouch for it. Then they got less serious about it. All right. Any other thoughts on that one, Mr. Allen?
Nope.
Wow. Well, check out the show notes on that one because a lot of the interesting stuff has been broken out there by Allen.
Yes, and there's a bunch of links to other information and so on.
Now, it's been a while since we've had a good Google story on the show, and I believe that's the next story in the lineup.
Just some Google giving us some insight into some of their stuff. So Google posted on their Google Online Security blog about why they structure their domains in a certain way and how they deal with hosting user-generated content securely. Right? So most people don't really think of hosting user-generated content as a big security issue.
Oh, sure.
But there are some issues with it.
Right.
For example, if you're, say, Google and you're hosting a service like Picasa, which is just picture hosting, that would seem like wouldn't really be a security vulnerability, right?
Right, yeah. I could see maybe legal rights issues or something like that.
But in this case, the one specific problem is someone discovered the ability to create what's called a GIF-R. So instead of a jar, which we'd have for Java, which is a Java archive, it's actually just a zip file containing a bunch of Java files. You can create what's called a GIF-R.
Oh,
and basically all this is if you take a GIF file, any valid real GIF file, and then concatenate to it the .zip, then you get a GIF that displays properly. But if you open it with a .zip program that is
vulnerable,
fuzzes it enough, it'll open it as a .zip file still. So it turns out basically the zip processor in the Java thing just ignores the GIF file at the front and opens the zip file like normal.
So you can hide, you can sort of embed a zip file in a picture?
Yes,
in a way?
And now this is how the vulnerability was originally discovered, was a Lifehacker article talking about steganography and about a really easy way to hide a zip file inside a .gif.
Right.
With just using the Windows copy command.
And did they mention, okay.
Right? Because you just take a .gif, you just say copy .gif plus .zip to this file name, and you end up with... And basically they said, WinZip and 7-zip won't open this, but WinRAR does. And it turns out that the implementation in Java does as well. So then what they discovered was that if they posted one of these GIF-Rs on Picasa, then they could... on some web page they were going to run the exploit on, they could put the applet code with source equals http:// the URL from Picasa. Now, Google's URL happened to be like a bunch of random letters, probably an acronym or something. It didn't actually say Google in it. But they found that that was just a CNAME pointing to lh4.google.com. So they rewrote the embed a little bit. So now when you got the security pop-up, is do you want to allow this code from lh4.google.com to run on your computer? And you're like, well, sure, I trust Google.
Google's great.
And you click yes. And meanwhile, you're running this Java archive disguised as a GIF file that just happens to somebody posted in their Picasa album.
Gotcha. Wow.
But you're trusting Google, and Google hasn't verified this file at all.
Yeah, right. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of other things like that as well. And some browsers can be fooled like that, where if you probably did like the same thing with this .gif and then attached a JavaScript file to the end of it, you might get it to run the JavaScript. And there's the article talks about a bunch of the different types of exploits for it, including one in Internet Explorer where Internet Explorer gave more precedence to the UTF-8 marker in the file rather than the headers from the web server.
Mm-hmm.
And you could basically cause the file to be interpreted in the wrong format, causing all kinds of weirdness.
Word. That is...
So Google talks about how they've shifted all user content to googleusercontent.com. So it's very clear that that didn't come from Google. It's something somebody uploaded to Google.
Okay.
And they also use separate subdomains and stuff for that as well, so they can have different access control policies. But also the other important thing there is by moving it from a subdomain of google.com to a completely separate domain, it means that an exploit that does successfully run from content at googleusercontent.com can't touch your Google login cookie, which is at google.com.
Right.
Because of your browser's same origin policy.
Right.
And so that way, an exploit that does run, say, on somebody's picture they uploaded to Google Plus can't take over your Google Plus account.
Mm-hmm. There you go. So their real solution was just to get it off google.com. That was
Part
really
of it, yes.
Yeah.
But the problem with doing that was, what about private content? A picture I have posted my Google Plus that I want only people I specifically allowed to be able to see.
Okay.
Or if you're using Google Apps for Enterprise,
right,
and you have some Google Docs, and you only want this file to be accessed by people in your corporation that you've allowed, and so on.
yeah.
So they can't use the Google authentication token for that because that's on the Google domain, not the user content domain.
Right.
So they talk about some of their strategies for dealing with that, which range from issuing a temporary cookie for googleusercontent.com, or passing authorization tokens via the URL, or making a URL that only works for one specific user. Temporary URLs that expire after a couple of minutes, and so on.
Yeah.
And the trade-offs they had to make between making it really easy to use and mitigating the risk of people accidentally disclosing a private URL.
Yeah.
Right. If you're in Google Docs and there's like an image and you right-click, copy image location, and paste that somewhere, it allows you to avoid the access control. Right. You can accidentally expose private pictures or whatever.
Right.
Most people take advantage of this fact when sharing pictures from Facebook. Right? You'll see people try to share the URL to an album on Facebook, and it's like, well, I'm not your friend, so I can't see that. But if they right-click and copy the location of the image and paste that just hits Facebook's CDN, and anybody has access to that.
Pulls the file.
So if you can predict the name of somebody's picture, you can view their private content. Or if somebody accidentally, in this case, exposes the URL of a private file, then all the security's out the window.
Right.
So Google actually has some mitigation in place so that only public content can be accessed that way. And so maybe there's something Facebook could learn here as well.
Yeah.
The problem is Facebook's just using a commercial CDN called Akamai instead of hosting their own like Google does.
Right.
And so they don't have that level of control to be able to do that.
Right. And Google has
anything you consider extremely private on Facebook ever.
And I would say the significance of that is Google has full-time engineers sitting at that level thinking about this stuff, designing this stuff, whereas Facebook has sort of outsourced that whole element, which has its advantages but also has its disadvantages.
Yes.
So any other thoughts on this one?
No, but if you're into web development and web apps at all, you might want to go and read it. This is very interesting.
There you go. All right, Alan, well, let's take a quick break here and say thank you to our friends at GoDaddy.com who have sponsored TechSNAP for quite a while now and are bringing you this week's episode. Now, GoDaddy.com, of course, is the world's #1 domain name registrar, and they're sort of the golden standard. And we have a great offer for you for this month. It expires at the end of August, which I realize is pretty close. However,
Yes,
every now and
I
then...
had to go and do this today.
Did you do it? Good
Or I
man.
forgot.
Me too.
So I've been saying I was going to do it for the last 2 or 3 weeks because, like, oh, that's an awesome code. I need to use that.
Here's what I really love about GoDaddy is so you know how like you'll sign up for a bunch of services or something, and then like when you don't think you're using them, you might just let them expire and you don't bother renewing. I had actually a pretty important CDN for some of the back end audio stuff. And GoDaddy contacted me and said, hey, you know, I see you're just kind of letting this expire. Did you know that Linux Action Show Mir.com will go away if that expires? And it looks like, according to our records, you're actively using that. I was like, oh, holy crap. I didn't even realize. Thank you for letting me know. And I took advantage of the offer, too. Use our code GO20OFF5. GO20 off 5. You'll save 20% on anything you buy at GoDaddy.com. It might be a renewal, could be a domain. And every now and then they squeak a few through after the month if there's enough left in the inventory. So go grab that, Go20 off 5. And for you you tech heads who really want to play with something cool, and this would be a good chance to do that with this discount, go check out their different dedicated server options. I'm particularly fond of, now, you guys are probably going to hate on me for this, but they've got a very, very easy one-button deployment of a very reasonable Ubuntu-based server. And I actually like Ubuntu as my server OS, if it's not FreeBSD, Alan, of course,
Yes.
Alan.
The one time I made a server that wasn't FreeBSD, it was Ubuntu.
Yeah, I you know, the long-term...
happened to be a Bitcoin box, and Ubuntu was just easier to set up with the graphics card and everything.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, and you know the long-term support edition actually makes a pretty good platform because you get you know you're going to get years.
Well, there's
of
a
updates.
reason things like OpenStack are based on Ubuntu long-term support.
It's a good mix of modern but stable. I really think that, and you know,
it kind of has a similar approach to how FreeBSD's main releases work.
Yeah,
in that it's kind of also provides that combination of what you get with the CentOS. They only change the services, like the version of PHP that's included, only changes with each major version number.
Right. And
the difference is Ubuntu, that's every 2 years, whereas CentOS, that can be 5 years, and it gets a little ridiculous at that point.
And then you don't have compatibility breakage.
Yeah.
So check those out. GoDaddy has those, and you can use our code to get discounts on that. Again, that code is Go20OFF5 when you're shopping at GoDaddy.com and you're checking out. And thank you to GoDaddy for the long-time support of the TechSNAP program. All right, Alan, that's all our news, right? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, then I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or using that contact form at the top of the website, or submitting your question to our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv, which is a great way to get something on the show, because then we can also get the other folks in the community to comment on it as well. Now, Alan, are you ready for the first question? It comes from the subreddit. All right. Now, this is from Mike Doherty, and he says, how about a tool for provisioning new servers? If Puppet is for configuring large collections of servers, what do you use for provisioning servers, like installing the OS and whatnot? I recently did some work on a foreman for my last employer, but I'm interested in knowing what else is out there and what else Alan uses. And again, that was from Mike Doherty. So, Alan, what about for actually provisioning the server? What do you use?
Right. So what you want to do is bootstrap it, basically install the OS and maybe install Puppet on it so that Puppet can take over and manage everything after that. Now, this is a much bigger deal if you're doing a lot of machines like locally or on a LAN or at a data center or something. So we don't do that much of that because we tend to get our servers in all different places. And because we're renting them, a lot of times the ISP installs the OS for us.
Right.
Although a lot of them now provide IPM or IPMI or KVM over IP so that we do it ourselves still. But, you know, the FreeBSD install takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So a lot of times I just do it by hand.
Process,
but you can script it. With FreeBSD 8 and older, sysinstall had a .cfg file you could make and do some stuff. But
an answer file?
Yeah, but BSD install, the script that is the installer now, is actually just a shell script with a series of interactive dialogues if certain variables are not defined.
Oh.
So if you just define those variables, then it's already automated.
Oh, that's slick.
Yeah, so basically BSD install, instead of being an installer, is literally just a bunch of subcommands that take care of the different steps. And so there's a mode in it called auto, which is what happens when you boot off the CD.
Yeah, okay.
So if you want to make your own installer, the easiest way is to start with that script, and it's in the source tree under BSD install/scripts. It's called auto, and basically it's 225 lines, including some error handling and stuff, and it just runs, set up your keyboard type, pick your location, decide what to install, partition the drives, and so on. So if you just take that and edit it down a little bit, remove the dialogues, and set the list of like what distributions you want to install. So, do you want the source code for the OS or just the binaries? Do you want the documentation? Do you want the ports tree? Do you need the lib32 on your 64-bit system? So you just define those lists, and you can just run that script. And
Alan,
it could take you a couple of minutes, and you'd be good to go.
I'm in love. That sounds so. 225 lines. That's it, and it does all of that.
That's for the automatic one that boots off the CD. So if you take out a bunch of the functionality you don't need from that, you could make a really small one. And then in the handbook, they have instructions on how to make your own CD. So you could make your own CD of that after.
There you go.
The handbook also includes instructions on Pixie booting and setting it up with NFS.
Nice.
So you could just have, if I suddenly was going to build a rack full of FreeBSDs, yes. If I was going to build a rack full of FreeBSD servers, I would set up one of these with the Pixie boot and NFS, and as you turned each FreeBSD machine on, it would boot and install the OS.
The nice thing about the FTP is you might be able to actually do that from a remote data center. So that's pretty neat, and that's in the FreeBSD handbook, and Alan has that linked in the show notes.
And I also provide some links for some more advanced scripts. They have ones now that like automatically set up ZFS and everything for you.
Oh yeah.
Like the one determines how many disks are in the machine. If there's just one, it partitions it a little bit of UFS for the base system, make that read only, and then set up ZFS on the rest. Or a second one where, if you have a couple of disks, it will set up the small partition at the beginning read only mirrored across every disk, and then the rest of the space on each disk will be a RAID 5 or RAID Z array of all your remaining space.
Nice.
And it does all that automatically, and it's only a couple hundred lines, and most of it is just formatting to make it easy to read. You could easily make it less lines, so it's not a lot, really.
I'm going to be so pissed if you make me a FreeBSD convert. I am going to be pissed, Alan, pissed. Yeah. I got a lot of time invested into Linux, but that sounds really sweet.
Basically, like I say, a lot of times I just get given the IP address of a box with SSH credentials, log in, install Puppet, and let Puppet do everything after that.
Yeah, once you get the base done, it's pretty quick.
Yeah, and if I get IPMI, it's connect to the machine, remotely mount the ISO image. I use the very small boot-only image, and then do the rest of the install over FTP, and it's done in a couple of minutes.
There you go. All right, should we move on to the next question?
And basically, part of the reason I do that also is the machines I'm dealing with, because I'm renting them from different places, are not identical. So the disk layouts are often quite different.
Sure.
Sometimes there's very small disks, sometimes very large disks, sometimes there's 2 disks or 5 disks. And also, the host names are not, I can't use an automatic way to generate a host name. Because in the system, I'm anal about the way I name my machines. It's all hierarchical.
Right, of course, Alan, of course. All right, now the next email. So this next email was sent into TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, and it comes from Dwayne. And Dwayne writes, hi, Chris and Alan. Your show is awesome. I've learned a lot on the ins and outs of security and how some of the big companies operate due to your show. I have a question about online security. With the recent break-ins, along with several hacked sites, what are your views on OpenID? Is it more secure / better than, say, passwords and using LastPass? What do you think, Alan? OpenID.
Well, OpenID still uses a password. Just the idea with OpenID is it's kind of like OAuth or something you would use, when you use your Twitter or Facebook account to log into somewhere else. OpenID basically means you have authentication from some third-party provider, and then you use that at a site that supports OpenID.
Yeah.
So basically, you show up at a site, for example, Server Fault, which is part of the Stack Exchange group. It's a place where you can post questions about server stuff and people answer them. It's a very cool site. It's like, I'm sure everybody's heard of it.
Maybe, I hope so.
They use OpenID, and or it's one of the options. So you go there and you provide your OpenID, which is basically an email address, and then that connects to whatever provider, whatever the domain is for that email address, and you log in there instead. So basically, you provide your credentials to the trusted provider, and they certify your identity to the site you're trying to use. The advantage to this is you don't end up with a bunch of separate logins for separate sites. Every site uses your OpenID, or every site that supports OpenID anyway, uses the same ID. So it kind of links them together and means you would only have one password to remember instead of a bunch of separate ones.
Right.
Although, that can be a vulnerability in itself. OpenID is probably more secure than each of those individual sites, because I'm sure of any group of sites, a bunch of them have various security problems or trade-offs that they've made that you wouldn't have made.
And something to mention, the big thing about OpenID, as opposed to like Facebook Connect or Twitter Connect or Google Connect or whatever they're called, is that OpenID can be decentralized, right? So whereas Facebook can, Facebook is widely deployed. I think really Facebook and Google and Twitter offering similar services kind of slowed OpenID down a little bit. But the nice thing about OpenID is that it's not controlled by a single company.
Right. Anybody can start their own OpenID provider, so you can choose whatever one you want. Or importantly, an advantage to OpenID is you can be your own provider. If you own your own domain, you can set up your own OpenID provider on that domain, and that way you only have to trust yourself.
Right. And you could, and they state on the Stack Exchange site, which links to the OpenID page, 50,000 websites support OpenID logins. And, there's also the OpenID Foundation, which is sort of a commercial entity that sits above OpenID and manages all the legal aspects of it and takes care of all that stuff. So it's a pretty solid system. But do you think it's more secure?
Can be. Basically, it's because it's an open source project, it's more likely to follow strong practices and so on.
And if you do run your own provider, the security's up to you, you're not a very big target. Yes,
and on top of that, the other thing is that if it does get compromised, it's only that provider. Not like if something were to get compromised in the Facebook Connect architecture, somebody could simulate any person at Facebook.
Right.
Whereas with OpenID, it's much more constrained because there's so many separate providers, they would only break one at a time.
Yeah.
Unless it was a class break that broke all implementations of OpenID.
And that's why Facebook will always be, it's just such a larger significant target than somebody running their own OpenID server. Now, you could still get caught in some sort of scripty scan or something like that, but, as long as you patch your crap.
People are saying, if the OpenID server gets owned, you lose everything. The first thing there is that there's not just one OpenID server. Anybody can start their own and they're all federated, right? It's based on an email address, and the domain part is the OpenID provider.
Yeah.
And so because there's a lot of them, it makes it less likely that you're going to end up with a break that compromises them all. And because OpenID never passes your password to the website that you're logging into, a compromise of, say, Stack Exchange doesn't compromise your OpenID account. And it's much more likely that each individual website will be compromised than the OpenID infrastructure itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then all it takes is OpenID using proper password practices like, bcrypt cryptographically hashed passwords with a good logarithmic complexity number, and your password's relatively safe even if somebody does get a list of all the hashes.
And you would hope they would do that, since protecting logins is their business, where
Yes.
Facebook probably does, I'm sure, take extreme caution too, but protecting logins isn't their specific focus. So there's that to look at too. All right. Should we move on to the next question?
Yep.
Okay, Alan. Well, the next question comes from Sean, and Sean writes, hello, guys. I love the show, and I've been watching since the 20s or so. I've had this idea for a long time, but I'm just not sure how to implement this. Basically, and I got to tell you, this guy is facing a scenario which is my nightmare scenario. More so than going bankrupt and losing my house. It's this scenario right here. Basically, my house is frequently used as a discussion area for our current projects and ideas. My ISP, and here it goes, recently set a cap of 100 gigabytes a month on my connection. I'm having issues staying under that limit with all of my devices on my network and constant usage. I want to set up a box to store all of the incoming traffic on its hard drive and have the router or some program check to see if the files are on the box before it starts to download from outside servers. I want to store the cache on YouTube videos and any downloadable programs, etc., etc. The server box will be connected directly to the router. Thank you for all the work you do. I support the shows, and I always ask my friends, did you know about Jupiter Broadcasting? Have a great day. Awesome. Thank you, Sean, for helping spread the word.
Yes. So the simple solution there is if you set up that server and or replace your router with pfSense.
Yep, there you go.
Then you can. There's a module you can install called Squid. Squid is a web proxy, and it stores a cache on the hard drive of content and avoids downloading it twice.
So pfSense...
I'm not 100% sure how that works for Flash, though, because Flash isn't over HTTP.
pfSense doesn't have to replace the router, but that would be the best spot to put it.
Yes,
yeah.
It's a lot easier to install pfSense and use the Squid add-on for that than to try to build your own Squid from scratch.
Oh, wait.
But you can. It was one of the things that I taught my students to do in my BSD security class was they actually had to... by hand, set up a NetBSD box with Squid and the IP filter firewall and block all access to the internet except through the proxy, and then set up the proxy to block Facebook and to cache.
This, and we do mention it every show, every episode. There's a feedback in here where pfSense is brought up. We're on a streak, and
Squid limits. Check your traffic shaping rules. I don't know why Squid would only give you 400 kilobits per second.
And this is what I was going to say. Is also when push comes to shove, he could use pfSense to implement some traffic shaping too. So that way, he's not surprised by something running wild and consuming a bunch of bandwidth. He could have QoS policies in there that would stamp that down before it got nuts. Also, pfSense will run cumulative totals and keep you advised of how much data that has gone through during a certain period of time, so you can stay on top of your cap, and that's really nice too. Yeah,
you can set like a weekly limit on top of your regular monthly limit so that you don't end up trying to eke out, to survive the last week of the month with no quota left.
And it's free.
Yes.
So what's not to love? All right. So the next email, or actually, no, it's not an email. It was actually a post on the TechSNAP subreddit. Came in for Glitter Gulch.
Hold on. No, you skipped some stuff.
Oh, did I skip one?
Yes. So there was another email. It wasn't very long, so I didn't paste the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Daniel wrote in to say that he uses, if you remember last week, somebody wrote in and said they had a problem with their Puppet installation when they were up to like 1,200 servers.
Yes. Yeah. Performance issues.
Yeah. Now, Daniel writes in that in his installation, they manage about 2,000 nodes with Puppet, and they only have 2 Puppet masters and only 2 for redundancy, not for performance reasons. Part of it is they're running Apache with Mod Passenger. So basically, instead of using the built-in web server, they use a real one, which the people from Puppet tell you to do if you're going to have more than one server, or if you're going to have more than one node.
Really?
It's like the built-in WebRick server built in Ruby is really not meant to scale.
Oh, yeah.
It's just for testing. You should get a real web server if you're going to deploy this.
I could totally see how that would be a performance bottleneck.
Yeah.
Which is actually not awesome, since the whole purpose of Puppet is managing as many machines as possible.
Right, but basically, you scale it like you would any app, right?
Sure.
If you're going to build an app in PHP, you don't write the web server in PHP. You plug it into Apache or Nginx or something.
That's exactly right. You treat it like you treat anything you need to scale. Yeah.
Right. And so, Puppet is very explicit about that in the instruction manual. I'm not sure how the guy set up his 1200 that was performing badly, but I've had no performance problems so far, and I'm running... I don't have everything under it yet, but I plan to have over 200 nodes running through it because I'll be managing jails on the physical machines as well.
And those show up as individual
Since
machines.
Every machine will basically be there at least twice.
Right.
Once for the main, once for the video jail, and then also some other jails.
Like
our fast CGI cluster each has a jail on each physical machine as well.
Not to screw everybody up, but going back to Sean's question about conserving bandwidth, also I was going to recommend that if he could manually cache some of those binary files. Like, for example, if his friends all needed to download Pigeon or they all needed to download Chrome, just save those on a local file server, download them once, and then just deploy it from your local file server. So that was something I wanted to mention to Sean as well. Sorry.
But yeah, I'm not sure what you would do for Flash specifically, because if it's getting it over RTMP, that's not an HTTP request and so it's not really going to be that cacheable.
Everything around the Flash embed would be cached, probably, like all the images and all that kind of stuff, but... Yeah.
I'm not sure I haven't ever bothered to investigate exactly what type of delivery YouTube uses. I guess if YouTube's doing the HTML5 player, that'll be a regular HTTP file that Squid will cache.
Yeah, you could always switch to HTML5 and
there is also a way in Flash to do something kind of like HLS, where it'd be a bunch of little files and would also be cached.
Yeah.
But I don't know for sure exactly how that works.
Shalomi, is that the next emailer? Or did you finish the one you were on?
This is the next email, yep.
Yeah, okay. So Shalomi, I'm not quite sure if I'm getting the name right. Writes in, hello there, I'm moving from LVM to ZFS. He goes on, gentlemen, first and foremost, your show is amazing, informative, high quality produced, and greatly edited. Keep up the great work. Jeez, thank you. Sorry, I butchered your name. So it goes on to say, my question is this. I have a Debian box running on an Atom CPU matched with an NVIDIA Ion for hardware accelerated video. Nice. I'm running XBMZ, SAB NZB, Sickbeard, Couch Potato, Samba, and NFS. Oh, this guy is rocking it. It sounds like my setup. And some of the other less used items like Deluge and a mule. Anyways, or a mule. The storage is an array of 6 unmatched drives running from an onboard SATA and from a PCIe SATA card, all part of a single LVM group. I'm a long fan of FreeBSD. I'm assuming he means long time fan. And used to work on it a few years back. Stopped around version 7 or so. And now it's about when I stopped too. And now I want to move my rig to FreeBSD instead of Debian. Oh, I'd love to know why. Is there any way to easily convert from LVM to ZFS? Oh, that's probably why right there. Without using a third medium. I'm okay with mounting the LVMs in FreeBSD and taking the disk one by one off the LVM and onto a ZFS array, but I'm not sure if this is even possible. Thanks so much, S.
Yeah, it's going to be a little tricky.
Yeah.
As far as I know, you can't actually mount an LVM inside FreeBSD. Although it depends on the type. There was some indications on the mailing list that the VINUM LVM in FreeBSD would kind of work. And you can mount ext 2 and 3 file systems.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that part. But yeah, the process for switching over, in the show doc, I included a link to an LVM how-to on how to remove a disk from an LVM.
Right.
This relies on the fact that you would have enough free space that the LVM could shrink. And so basically what you would do is make sure you have enough free space to remove one of the disks. Then you build that newly empty disk as a ZFS pool. Then you move over enough files to take out a second disk from the LVM.
Yeah.
And then add it to the ZFS and continue that. That's basically what I did with my home file server. I had a very similar setup. I had a bunch of unmatched drives, some on the onboard SATA, some on a $5 SATA RAID card. And I had got one new hard drive, and basically I wanted to replace the smallest one with the biggest one. And I decided to put it all under ZFS so the free space wasn't fragmented across a bunch of separate drives.
That's
because basically I was running out of space on the drive that holds, my sci-fi shows or whatever.
Yeah. This is an interesting. Of course, this is pretty relevant to me because I'm going to be moving from a file server to this new file server that I have in this box right here, and that I am going through how I'm going to migrate. The trick what I'm doing is I'm going to do an NFS mount, and I'm going to move stuff over the network, and I'm not going to try to change volume formats. Then I'm going to break down the old drives, spin write them, whichever ones remain standing, add them to the new array, and increase the storage even more so, up to 16 gigs. But in his scenario, he's trying to, I'm betting he doesn't have the space to do that.
Right. So if you can do one disk at a time.
I think that's the only approach. I think that's the way.
Of course, basically it relies on the fact that he has enough free space that when he takes out one disk, he'll have enough room on that one disk to move enough stuff to move a second disk. That's where it gets kind of like, my setup was kind of complicated. I had a 200, a 300, a 320, and 2 1.5 terabyte drives.
Yeah, let's see here.
Luckily, what I was doing was replacing that 200 with the 1.5 terabyte.
Oh, okay.
So I started with the 1.5 terabyte as the new array and started filling it up and shifting stuff around.
So I'm looking at Newegg. A 3 terabyte drive goes for $150.
Yep.
So, and you could use the
That's why I bought 18 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're finally coming back down to a reasonable price.
Yes.
So S could
the enterprise ones are still $400 for the same capacity.
Yes, I know. And that was one of the anyways.
That's why I'm doing double redundant RAID on cheaper disks instead of
he could do that. He could if he was willing to spend the $150 or something, or he could, if he could go smaller, he could kind of buy him some of that storage, and then he could use that for the migration. All right, should we get on to Glitter's question now?
There's a couple more issues here.
Oh, okay.
So once you've the problem with doing it one disk at a time like that is you will lose a little bit of the performance from ZFS, because if the very first disk in your array is full, when you're going to write a new file, it can't split it up evenly between all the disks to get more write speed, because one of them is already full. So to try to avoid this, ZFS has write biasing, where it'll try to make sure that all the hard drives end up being full at the same time at the very end.
That's so beautiful.
So if one disk is like at 75% full, one's at 25%, and one's at 0%, it'll break up the writes so that it's writing more data to the empty disk, a medium amount to the partly full disks, and a small amount to the almost completely full disk. Right? So that it tries to bring them back kind of closer together. But even then, you are still losing some of the performance. But not that much.
Okay.
I got to the point for me where I took some of the files that I started with originally, moved them off the array and back on the array so they would get redistributed evenly.
Oh, that's kind of a neat trick.
Very weird. Yeah.
Hack.
ZFS was originally going to have a feature called block pointer rewriting that would do this rebalancing and would also help deal with defragmenting files because of copy on write scattering them all over the place.
Okay.
But it was something that Sun never got to before Oracle destroyed them. Although there are people at the Illumos project working on this.
Wait, so who?
Hopefully that will come out.
ZFS development is continuing on. So is it still Oracle pushing that forward?
Well, Oracle has their kind of own thing going on with it, and then there's an open source project called Illumos or Illumos that is continuing development separately on completely open source kind of thing.
But where is FreeBSD pulling from?
Both.
Wow.
Mostly Illumos, because some of the newer ZFS stuff from Oracle is not open source.
So is ZFS future a little uncertain?
Not really. Basically, some of the stuff Oracle's doing might not be open source, but the ZFS from
what
the
you have now
project, and companies like NetApp and SpectraLogic and so on that are basing products on ZFS, they're based on the FreeBSD version or the Illumos version. So they're going to keep putting their money in that, not the Oracle version.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now glitters.
Almost.
Oh my goodness! More. No, bring it.
Yeah. So that's about it. So basically, my plan actually is now that I have 4 of these 3 terabyte disks for my house, I'm just going to build an entirely new RAID Z1 array, move all the files over to it, and then recycle the 1.5 terabyte drives for something else.
Yeah, that's exactly mine.
For your case,
for S or me?
For you, when you're building your array, and you said you're going to add the working drives from your old array in after?
Yeah, so I'll move all of the data off the current array onto this one, which will already be established, and then I want to take those drives and add them to the pool. Right. I don't know if I'm using the right term.
Yeah, right, but you would basically make them a separate RAID array.
Okay.
And you'll actually end up with something like RAID 50. You'll actually be striping across 2 separate RAID arrays.
Cool.
Yes, so you'll get really cool performance.
Oh! Well, that's great, because the file sizes I'm working with.
Yeah, you can't add more drives to an existing RAID array because of the way it's balanced, but you can add extra RAID arrays and then stripe across them.
Okay.
So it'll be fine.
I'm looking forward to that.
And then, in the future, when you want to upgrade it, the other option for upgrading is basically to individually replace one drive at a time with a bigger one, and then you let it resilver or whatever, and reconstruct the array. And then once all the drives are big enough, your array will just snap to being the bigger size.
Does it then rebalance everything across all the drives too? Like on the back end, or is that one drive?
No, if assuming that all the data is already bounced across each drive, you're basically replacing each drive with a bigger one.
Yeah.
So then you'll just have all the free space at the end of each drive, and your whole array just gets bigger to suit it.
Slick.
That's one of the advantages with ZFS because it's not just a volume manager and not just a file system. It's both. The file system can expand and contract as it needs, kind of.
That's awesome. I need expanding. I don't need contracting. I just need pretty much expanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to that. I'll let everybody know how it goes too as I accomplish each step. All right. Now, are you ready for Glitter's question? So Glitter submitted this to the TechSNAP subreddit, and I think a lot of people probably wanted this one, so I stuck this one in the show notes. He says, I want to hear more about Scale Engine, what it does, and some of the services. How about a segment just on Scale Engine? Now, we mentioned a lot, and I think you often infer to a lot of the back-end things or how they're done.
A little bit, yeah.
But, yeah, what's the pitch, Alan?
If you wanted a segment, you'd have to ask a more specific question.
Yeah.
I don't know what part you want to hear about. But I just did a quick rundown of basically what we do. I don't want to pull up Brian and be advertising about it, but basically the things that Scale Engine does are we have an Origin web cluster, which is basically a way to accelerate PHP MySQL applications to run faster and with a lot more concurrency. That's actually how I kind of got into Jupyter Broadcasting. I was just someone who watched, and I won a trivia contest that you guys had for Stoked.
Right.
And I was kind of in the closed beta for Stowe, and when the open beta came around, your forum got shut down by the shared hosting provider.
Right, you and I were playing Star Trek Online together on TeamSpeak, and I was probably bemoaning about my situation on TeamSpeak.
But yeah, basically your website was down with a message that it had been suspended.
Yeah.
And the ISP's like, yeah, you're going to have to buy a really expensive dedicated server, and we're not going to help you move your site.
Right.
And it'll take us a couple of days to set up the server.
Right. Right.
And I was like, well, I happen to run a company that does this thing where we specifically host websites that get a lot of traffic.
Well, and your key, as far as for me as the customer, your key advantage is Scale Engine's approach scales as you need it, as the name implies. So like what I kept happening is like a series of I would hit the limits of what that provider could offer me because we just keep growing. And so then I would move to the next provider. And then I would hit the limits of what that provider, and I kept and I would have these quote unquote unlimited plans and quote unquote 24/7 support, but they would only offer migrations during specific windows of that support, and it was just awful. And so finally you're like, well,
and the other problem was basically Jupyter Colony's forum was never going to be busy enough, or wasn't going to stay busy enough to be worth a $300 a month dedicated server.
Right. It was a special time because Stowe was about to launch.
Yeah, it was the open beta. There was a lot of buzz, but a couple of weeks later, the website's going to be back to normal traffic.
Yeah, and I didn't want to go to some massive plan just for a couple of weeks worth of traffic.
Right. And so the advantage with our OWC is you get billed for SQL queries and CPU time in PHP. So if your site's not very busy, you don't end up paying a lot. And if it is, then you're doing good so you can afford it. And it's quite inexpensive. So even compared to something like Amazon EC2, it's less expensive because you don't have that minimum of keeping at least one instance running.
Right.
And you're not paying for the amount of time your site is busy. It's just for, how many SQL queries you do and how many
it's a brilliant way to do it because it means that like everybody gets access to high performance distributed hardware because you're not the model is always so traditionally you buy this processor with this amount of RAM and this gigabyte level of storage and you get this many databases, and the problem is that is a fixed set and you can use half of that, you can use all of that, it just it doesn't move, it doesn't scale.
You sell someone one database for $5, that doesn't qualify a person who's going to have 100 rows and do one query a second, or somebody who's going to have 1 million rows and do 1,000 queries a second.
Right.
And that's why our pricing is based on the amount of CPU time and the number of queries in SQL and the amount of CPU time in PHP.
So then, am I jumping ahead? But video hosting kind of came later then, right?
Yeah. And so the Origin Web Cluster hosts things like originally the Jupyter Colony forums, later the Jupyter Broadcasting site, and then the Jupyter Force forums and a bunch of other stuff.
And a lot of other well-known sites too.
Yes. And then we have our edge side cache, which is an extremely fast, memory-backed, geographically distributed, most recently used cache. So basically it stores really frequently accessed content in memory somewhere close to the users. That's why we have, the 64 servers and 25 data centers in 9 countries. So that when you go to access, when you see the TechSNAP logo on the Jupiter Broadcasting site, that's coming from a server somewhere near you rather than from our main origin in Toronto, so that it's faster.
Right.
And so that the server in Toronto doesn't have to deal with every person that wants that image at once.
Yep.
And so it's really great for things like images, CSS files, JavaScript, and so on. But it can also cache entire pages with like a shorter time to live and stuff. So especially if you're doing like a blog with articles and most people aren't logged in, you can cache the entire article page. And it also supports something called edge side includes, which is a more complicated mechanism where you don't want to cache the entire page because, you need to have a recent comments section.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to show highlights, new material, or even just like latest posts.
This portion of my site's fairly dynamic, but the rest of it's static.
Right. Because the edge caching layer was originally designed for newspapers. So it was like, all right, the article's the same for everybody, but a logged in user needs to see their local weather report based on their zip code, or needs to be able to, the breaking news section needs to be updated every 5 minutes. But the article, once it's written, unless we have to post an edit, that never changes.
Yeah.
That can be cached forever.
Yeah.
And so we can kind of work like that. But yeah, so when you go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, the images, CSS, and JavaScript, you will all see load from our ESC.
And I've mentioned this before, but the other benefit of that is it helps your SEO ranking, because Google actually, when they bought your site, they actually take note if your images load from a different domain and a different server than the main content of your site does. So like all of the thumbnails at the front page of Jupiter Broadcasting load from a different server than the frame of the website itself, the HTML code. And
actually, it's set up so that they load from a couple of separate servers, or separate subdomains anyway, so that they load concurrently. Normally, your browser will only load 2 or 3 elements from any one server at a time.
Yeah.
So by basically tricking it into thinking the CDN is 4 or 5 different servers, it loads all the images at once and takes better advantage of your internet connection.
Yeah, you're essentially multi-threading the page load, and Google is hip to this, and Google will note this and bump a site up that does that a little higher than a site that doesn't do that. That's not
specifically,
a major thing.
if you and another site have about the same Google ranking, Google will give preference to the site that loads faster.
Yep. Yeah, that's the simple way of saying what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next service we have is the Content Distribution Network. This is basically the same idea as the ESC, but it's backed by disk instead of memory, and so it can hold more files and it holds them longer. Right. The cache in RAM is all about, it's only the most recently used stuff, and once something's not popular, it falls out of the cache so that something more popular can take its place.
And nobody beats your prices, literally.
Right.
Nobody's beating those prices.
We have a giant list of comparisons of all of our competitors and how they charge too much money.
They really do. I've looked into it, and it's trust me, I've looked into it.
The CDN basically is designed for possibly less frequently accessed files, and also for larger files that basically it doesn't make sense to try to fit in RAM. For example, the video download version of TechSNAP, which is like 700 megabytes.
Right, the HD one.
Yeah, so it's basically a disk-backed, geographically distributed, most frequently used cache instead of most recently used. So it caches the files that get used quite a bit, but maybe not necessarily that frequently. So it stores the static content close to the users for fast delivery, but it stores them on disk. So it's a little different. And works great for static content, especially larger stuff like audio and video podcasts. So if you download a JB episode from the website, that's the CDN.
You can complain to Alan.
Yeah.
It's been awesome because this was another example of when we had a provider pull the rug out from underneath us because we were doing too much traffic.
Yeah, Blip.tv pulled the rug out from not
everybody.
Just, but a bunch of people.
No, I know. This happened over and over again. And I actually, I pleaded my case to Blip TV. I literally said, look, guys, not only am I using you for all my distribution, but I've been using you for 2-3 years now, and I've got links that are 15 pages deep on my site that link to your CDN files. Please, can we work something out? I'll up my payment, anything like that. No, nothing. Yep. And we had to make the switch fast.
Yep.
And it's that's a real serious replumbing, and it works. It's working well.
Yes. there was something else about Blip TV. Oh, the other thing Blip TV did was they would let you burst at a reasonable speed for the first couple megabytes of the video to get it started, but then they would cap you to about 600 kilobytes per second, or
that
600 kilobits, or a reasonable rate. And now that made sense for what them conserving their bandwidth, but we don't do that with our CDN.
Well, no, because users like me who have FiOS, we want to get it as fast as freaking possible. So when I see my downloads capped at 600 kilobytes a second, it just drives me crazy.
For example, I was working with somebody in the chat room who was noticing that depending on which server in the Netherlands they got routed to, they would only get 4 megabytes a second instead of 9 megabytes a second. And so we were trying to figure out exactly what the problem was there.
Unfortunately, they're only getting 4 megabytes a second.
Yes.
Oh man, the cool thing too about it is it gives us. I was talking about this on the pre-show on the live stream, but Scale Engine gives us like the flexibility of having something posted that doesn't just automatically get scanned and taken down. Like a lot of the services you can use that will do the flash embeds for you, and maybe do ad embeds like YouTube or something like that, will also just decide on their own initiative to pull down your video. And you know when you're doing this as your business, you don't want that kind of vulnerability.
Right.
So that's what's great about that.
Yep. So our last service is the video streaming network that can host live, on-demand, pay-per-view, or fake live video streaming. So we provide basically multi-bitrate streaming to any screen. This is just kind of a marketing term, but we do RTMP, which is flash streaming, HLS, which will do your iOS devices like your iPad and iPhone, Android, Roku, VLC, and so on. Or RTSP, which is for older Androids, BlackBerry, QuickTime, VLC, etc. Yeah.
And we have links to those. If you want to check those out, go over to jblive.tv. We have the Flash player there, and we have links to the HLS and the RTSP stream, and you can try it in your device. Yeah, because the HLS game will work in iOS, but also Safari. And I believe the Roku app, if you search for JBTV and get the Roku app and the XBMC app, all use HLS for their live stream, right?
The XBMC app uses Flash via RTMP.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. It's what I love doing in VLC. And if you have a good low latency internet connection, it's a perfect video stream. And the comparison in Flash versus VLC, there's like maybe like a 10%, 15% different CPU usage. VLC is much lower. So if if Flash takes a lot of CPU on your system, throwing that into VLC sort of solves that problem. Cool.
And then Scale Engine also provides what we call the CView API, and that basically allows you to require a ticket in order to watch a video, and then your website through the API can issue those tickets and lock a ticket to a specific video and a specific IP address, a specific number of views and a specific time frame, and so on. So it allows you to do geo-blocking or to set up some kind of pay-per-view or subscription-based viewing. Because video streaming can get expensive, and you don't always want to give it away for free.
So if you monetize, you can kind of make up some of the costs. Could Jupiter Broadcasting do that for like a members-only section of videos that were only?
Yeah, we've talked about that before. Also, another thing we're working on is recording, where we could have, one of the ideas you had was to have the live stream be recorded and be available as part of the membership.
Right. People who subscribe monthly and support us, I would love to give them a little extra benefit.
Archives of the live stream, because there's a lot of stuff that happens during the live stream of TechSNAP that doesn't get in the recording, and some people want to see that. Yeah.
There's almost a whole nother show that happens off air that doesn't get recorded. All of the shows are like that, really. But this show and lasts the most.
Yeah. And also, sometimes there's a bit of a turnaround between the live and when the episode comes out.
So that's
it's something we're working on. But so we have the pay-per-view system. For example, cool. one of our customers actually is a hockey team in Finland. They're like a AHL level, so they're one step down from the NHL, and they basically sell pay-per-view access to footage from their hockey games.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you and I will talk more about our possibilities there in the future.
Yep.
So,
and then, the other one I mentioned was fake live streaming. That's basically where we use video on demand files, so pre-recorded files, and a schedule. It'd be almost a way for you to do the reruns.
Right, without having to actually stream it from.
Without having to stream them.
Yeah. That's
Although there's
cool.
some complications with that, but we're still working that out.
Cool. ScaleEngine.com, people, go check it out. And anything from hosting your own custom site to up to high-end CDN and video hosting.
For our ESC layer, the memory-based cache for images.
The fast edge cache, yeah.
Yes. It serves about 4 billion HTTP requests a month.
4 billion?
Yes. During peak times of the day, that's 2,000 requests per second or more.
McDonald's has got nothing on you, Alan. That's crazy. Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to... Glitter also submitted another thread that I thought was funny that we should point out. And everybody knows that TechSNAP 80 is going to be pre-recorded because Alan's going to BSD EuroCon, right?
Euro BSDCon, yep.
Yeah, okay. And so Glitter Gulch thought it'd be funny to start a thread in the subreddit. What news will break the week in October that Alan goes to Euro BSDCon? Let's make a prediction and put the headlines in the comments. So people have actually jumped in on this and are starting to put creative news stories that will likely break the week we take off. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes if you've got an idea of a zany news story that TechSNAP would normally cover. But
the one I didn't see on that subreddit was random Canadian causes riots in Poland.
No. internet podcaster Canadian internet podcaster Alan Jude caused a scene. Now, by the way, speaking of that episode 80, we want a bunch of your feedback. Send in your questions to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Use that contact form or submit into the subreddit. And I have linked in the show notes a thread that's already started for the stuff you wish noobs knew. So people that are coming into your field, if it's system admin, if it's network engineering, if it's sysdev, whatever it is, and people are coming into your industry and you wish they knew something before they sat down for the job, send it in to us. We're going to break it to the noobs. Transversely, you're a noob and you wish the old experienced guys were a little nicer, maybe a little more clear about something, let us know. If you want to submit it to that subreddit so that way people can vote on it and leave their thoughts and comments or read what other people have submitted, I have a link to that in the show notes. You're also welcome just to email it in any traditional way that you like.
Yes. So TechSNAP episode 80, which is what would normally air the week of the October 16th, we'll be recording that before episode 29, so earlier in the day that day.
Wait.
And it'll be all question and answer. So
before episode 79.
Yes, before episode 79. Mm-hmm. So please send in lots of questions to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Look at it. Look how organized we are. We're only at episode 73, and we're giving people that much time. We're really good.
Yep.
So.
We want to make sure that episode 80 is still as awesome as our regular episode.
Yeah, we want to pack it full of content. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the feedback for this week, but I believe it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are the stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you a link to go check out on your own, do a little homework, and they're almost always exclusively powered, well, at least a good portion of them, by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan, the first story goes to me. Are you ready to jump into this thing?
Yep.
This is just really a follow-up on a story that we haven't heard much about for a while. That's why I tossed it in here. Another LulzSec hacker is the latest to be arrested in the U.S. A man suspected of being a member of the LulzSec hacking group, Ronaldo Rivera, 20 years old, is accused of being involved with hacks on the Sony PlayStation Network in May and June of last year. If he's convicted, he could face up to 15 years in prison. The FBI has alleged that he worked with Cody Kissinger, a 24-year-old who pleaded guilty and then, I believe, indicted him or implicated him. So there you go. They're still busting the LulzSec boys, Alan.
Apparently.
LulzSec guys, the lulz just keep rolling for those guys.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good news, Alan. A backdoor's been found in the human brain, hasn't it?
Yes.
Good news.
So researchers that presented at the Usenix Security Conference basically demonstrated what they jokingly call a zero-day vulnerability in your brain.
Oh, good.
So basically, brain-computer interfaces have started to get quite a bit cheaper. So now for $200 or $300, you can get this hat that you wear that puts a bunch of electrodes touching your brain, or your skull anyway. It's basically an EEG, and it can measure electrical responses in your brain. And then there's an API to interface with that with software. And basically, they've kind of determined that they can detect what's called a P300, which is basically the electrical signal that your brain gives off when it recognizes something.
Okay.
And so they got a bunch of volunteers that didn't know what was going on, put the hat on them, and had them watch a video screen. And it would flash some images. And basically, they found that when they flashed the logo for the bank you have, you would recognize it. Whereas when it flashed the logo for a bank you didn't use, you wouldn't recognize it as strongly.
Because your brain can't help but make the connection from your memory, even if you don't
it's basically
vocalize it.
That P300 is the same thing as like when you go into your shed and you're looking for a hammer, when you see the hammer, it fires.
Yeah.
You know, and so they found that, you know, they could infer what bank you use.
Because you and I have sheds and grab hammers all the time.
Yeah. I used to have a shed.
Yeah, me too, back in the day.
Yeah. They also found that, you know, if they flash your PIN number, a bunch of numbers up, if one of them was your PIN number, then you would recognize that. And also, you know, they could figure out where you live by flashing up bits of maps and stuff. And basically, it's not 100% accurate, but they can definitely increase their chance versus randomly guessing which bank you use.
As Sword Saint points out in the chat room, that tinfoil hat doesn't seem so ridiculous anymore.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But at this point, it's, you know, only people that are wearing the brain-computer interface. Now, the supposition with this is, you know, they now have these to the point where people can start controlling their computer with it. And, you know, if this started being used in a game, someone could build a game that was very subtly getting information from you over time.
Interesting.
You know, by eventually, you know, ferreting out your PIN number or something.
Seeing what you're responding to and then adjusting the game world based on that. Ooh, creepy cool. Yeah. I also heard that while right now you have to wear like this cap, that they actually think that they could implant little metal connectors under your skull, and then you would just have like these. You'd have these connectors that would connect a little near range communications connector, and it would transmit without having to have any kind of incision or anything like that. And you could really then like have this system that would just clamp on, and it would be like this removable, like quick wear accessory is what they were saying, like for like future implementation, which sounds really creepy, but interesting. Just saying.
Yeah.
All right, should we do the next story?
Yep.
All right, so this next one's for all you Windows 8 lovers out there, because of course Windows 8 is now available for like TechSNAP and MSDN subscribers and business. Windows 8 tells Microsoft about everything you install, and not very securely. Now, that is a little attention-grabbing, and it is only if you go with the defaults in Windows 8. When you are at one of the final screens in the Windows 8 install is, it asks you about customizing some settings, and you can say use the easy setup or set my specific custom settings. And one of them that gets turned on by default and stays on unless you check it off is the smart screen technology that actively looks at the applications you're installing on your system and checks them against Microsoft. But in order to do that, they have to give Microsoft the name of the application. They're actually sending the file name you're installing and other metadata about that file to Microsoft. Now, Microsoft, after this was exposed, flipped on SSL v3. They were using SSL v2, I guess, to do the transmission. So that was what one of the hubbubs were, is that they weren't, you know, being as secure as possible.
Why there's anything still using SSL v2, we will never know.
Yeah. It only took Microsoft 14 hours after the article was published to flip on SSL v3. But yeah, so it says here that researchers discovered the file name of the app you're trying to install is sent to Microsoft, and they're just, you know, they're raising this as possible security concerns because they go to the examples. Could the FBI subpoena Microsoft records that you were installing, say, Tor browser and other tools to avoid detection and things like that?
Yeah, and things like that. And, you know, but at the same time, I can see why this information is useful to Microsoft. Now, for example, when they enabled the error reporting at a much higher scale with Vista and 7 compared to XP, they found that, you know, X percentage of all the crashes were due to video card drivers rather than Windows. Or, you know, in different areas and different problems. And
now looking at it in retrospect, I think that actually led to a huge quality improvement in video drivers to the point now where you can do updates and don't even have to restart a Windows 7 PC.
Yeah.
For video card drivers.
But yes, definitely turning that on without asking people and sending that kind of data is definitely not something that should be done by default.
It's a bit creepy. It's a little creepy, yeah. All right, now I think the next story in the roundup is yours. It's about VMware.
Yes. So VMware is joining the OpenStack Foundation. And as one article put it, embracing its ugly sister.
Yeah. this is good. This is really good for OpenStack. And
Yes.
honestly, I think this is an example of VMware seeing the way the winds are blowing and pivoting appropriately. Would you agree?
Yeah, and a lot of the tools that OpenStack are based on, like libvirt and so on, already have at least some support for VMware.
Yeah.
So I think VMware is like, we don't want Zen Server to be the only enterprise scale option for people deploying large.
Right. We don't want to be
instances
left out of the
OpenStack.
party. Exactly.
Yeah.
Good for VMware, really, because I think that would have started slowly being the people's migration away from VMware. Now I think they're they're gonna be in the game for long.
There was related news about they've changed their pricing around a bit. They used to have caps on how much RAM you could have without having a more expensive license, and they've gotten rid of that and gone back to just
CPU socket.
You can't have more than so many CPU sockets before you have to buy a more expensive license.
I have a client right now that actually stayed on VMware ESXi version 4 to simply avoid that new licensing scheme. And
although that didn't kick in until you had 256 gigabytes of RAM, so probably wasn't that big of a deal. But
it was to them.
Yes. If you have more than 256 gigabytes of RAM, then yes, it would be a huge deal.
Yeah. Now, this next story also fits in with Windows 8 users out there. So if you're using Windows 8, why not, just since we just talked about it? You might be missing the start menu. Well, guess what? There's an open source clone to the rescue. Classic mode, Windows XP mode, and Windows 7 mode. I actually kind of almost like this better than the real deal because you kind of get the best, like they've got the classic mode, but still has the search, which I kind of like. Yep. I'll come clean. For testing purposes, for a client, I installed a couple of Windows 8 machines to see how things just ran because they have an IE plugin and all this kind of stuff. And I even upgraded my laptop that has a Windows 7 dual boot on there, and I do miss the start menu quite a bit. I'm trying Metro, but to me, it's just a full screen start menu that then I click on the app and I just go back to the classic desktop. I don't really stay in Metro, and I find the Windows Marketplace very underwhelming at the moment. It's all very new, though.
One thing I've noticed is that with Windows 7, I've never used the start menu. I use the search box there, but if you got rid of the start menu button and just gave me a search box on my taskbar, I could live with that.
Well, the Metro UI does still let you search. It's kind of weird the way it does it because then it puts all of
but I would basically, I'd prefer to have almost everything I do is just Windows run and type some stuff anyway.
Oh, I guess. So I didn't know.
I still treat Windows like command line sometimes.
Moonlit in the chat room is also, I'll check this out, linking to Start 8 from Stardock. I was wondering if the Stardock guys were going to do this, and I think it's free too. So one thing you might like about Windows 8, Alan, is it has some totally revamped task manager stuff and revamped file copy dialog stuff, and it breaks out information almost more like a Unix box in the task manager now. It feels more like a... Yeah?
Windows 7 solved a bunch of the problems, like not continuing the rest of the copy after an error so that you could deal with the one file it's asking about overwriting or not being able to copy without holding up the entire copy and wasting hours of your time. But I also use a third-party app called Copy Handler that lets me, pause, resume, and throttle copies.
TerraCopy is one I've used that'll do that too, which is nice. All right, so the next story in the roundup, Alan, goes to you. Back to FreeBSD. Enough about that Windows 8. FreeBSD struggles to gain.
Well, it's just there was a
UFI support.
Google Summer of Code project, a student working on EUFI.
Right.
And he ran into a couple of specific issues, and he's only a student, so it wasn't. It's one of the first times that the Google Summer of Code project for FreeBSD wasn't completed. But
do you think it's of particular importance that FreeBSD has UEFI
it will
support?
be going forward as the motherboards get more specific.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But basically, at this point, the server motherboards aren't going to change until the servers support it.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right.
But basically, it's a future thing that we definitely want to get sorted out. But part of it at this point is problems with documentation and so on.
Okay.
Keep
an eye on it. You never know.
Yep.
So, update on Dropbox, who we've covered over the life of this show. Dropbox has upgraded security with two-factor authentication. We mentioned this would be happening, and it looks like it's actually come through. They're now offering two-factor, and I like their approach, too. Alan, have you checked this out?
No. What is the second factor?
So they will let you use sort of your own... They'll have several options you can use, including the one that I like, the Google Authenticator, because I already use that for a couple of other things, too. So it is sort of a more flexible... I was what I was expecting from Dropbox is you'd have to have the Dropbox app on Android or iOS, and you would have to use that to generate the token. And and I just thought that kind of would be a sucky locked-in solution. They're still putting the big beta testing flag on this, so it's not necessarily ready for everybody to go adopt. And you do kind of want to be cautious with this if you really rely on Dropbox like I do.
Yes, you don't want to end up locked out of it, not able to access it.
But yeah, check it out. So there you go. If you want to test it, just go get client version 1.5.12 or later. You can find links in their forum. Just search for the Dropbox forum and grab it. Good for Dropbox. This is a response to that audit that they did. All right, Alan, this next one goes to you. A top-level universal cross-site scripting vulnerability. Is this?
Yes.
Is this just? Tell me this is kidding. This is just a joke. Right?
No, it's a fairly specific case. That's not a big deal.
Oh, okay, good.
So it's a bug in Internet Explorer where certain sites are classified as being in your intranet and have a much more lax security policy, including allowing cross-site scripting.
Right.
Now, what happens here is it's sites that basically have what look like unqualified names. So they look like the Windows network names you would have for machines on your LAN, where it's just a name with like no .com after it. Specifically, some of the examples are .io. So basically the root of the .io top-level domain and .ai. And basically, which is the Indian Ocean, and the other one is Antigua or something like that. Basically, they're top-level domains that actually have a website on the very top-level domain. So it'd be like a website just called com or yes or ca.
That's pretty limited.
Those ones are specifically not set up because it looks like an unqualified domain name.
Right. So
but
just make sure.
In the way that Internet Explorer handles them, it basically assumes, because there's no dots in the name, that it's a LAN server rather than the internet, and allows all kinds of silliness to ensue.
So there you go, TechSNAP audience. Friends don't let friends use Internet Explorer.
Yeah, but basically what it means is any sites at the top level could have access to everything via cross-site scripting.
That's
basically, they're not subject to the regular same domain policy because they don't appear to have a domain.
There you go. That's pretty crazy, but hopefully, like you said, not a very likely. Not a lot.
There's not very many sites at the top level. Yeah. Although, if you could gain control of someone's DNS to be able to inject rogue DNS entries,
there you go.
Like we saw that one with that DNS changer virus. If you could change the settings of someone's computer to point their DNS to your server, you could create as many top-level domains as you wanted and override the ones that are already there.
Totally. That's true. All right, Alan. Last story in the roundup. You ready for this one? Hackers dump millions of records on banks and politicians. Team Ghost Shell, a hacking collective linked to the infamous group Anonymous, is claiming that they have hacked some major U.S. institutions, including the likes of banks and accountants of politicians, and have posted those details online. Now, do you know much about this one?
I looked through some of the dumps. None of it looked all that particularly interesting. Like, I didn't actually see anything that was actually a bank or, any politicians I recognized or anything. But for a number of the sites, they had username, password, email address, and phone numbers of users. And some of the passwords were, just MD5 or just SHA1, which you could rainbow tables in a couple of minutes. Basically, I looked through some of it. It looks like they used SQL injection, websites that basically didn't do sanitization. And basically, through the URL, you could make them do a different SQL query than they were supposed to. And they used that to just dump the entire database.
Gotcha.
And
so if there was,
by dumping a bunch of separate databases, they managed to get over 1 million rows of data from different things.
And maybe some politicians are in there, but nothing really.
There was some Wall Street stuff in there. Like there was one that looked like it had. I don't know if it was a job site or what. It had one database of users and a database where it stored resumes, and then a database of people it sent the resumes to, which were people with like email addresses at HSBC, Morgan Stanley, and that kind of stuff. Major Wall Street firms.
Yeah.
And some of them. I didn't have time to look through all 1 million records, and there might be more in there.
Sounds like nice afternoon reading, Alan. Come on.
one thing was a lot of headlines grabbed that said it had stuff from the CIA. It had stuff from a company called C.I.A
Yeah.
Services,
Yeah.
which is like a property management company for some apartment building in like Texas or something.
What a stupid name. What a stupid name for a company.
CIA Services.
Gosh. All right, Al. Now that's everything in the roundup. What do you say I unbox the server before we get out of here? You ready for this?
Yes. Let's
All
do
right,
this.
so I'm going to start. I just opened it. They've included a nice layout of the motherboard, a sticker, and looks like all of the manuals and some brochures for IX systems. Oh, look at this, and a free NAS, like a book about this appliance. That's really cool.
Manuals are good.
Yeah, manuals are good. Okay, so I guess I got to set this thing on the floor because it's kind of heavy to get it out of the
I can
box.
imagine.
Yeah, it's probably all those hard drives.
It came with some hard drives?
Yeah, 12 terabytes
Yeah.
worth.
Yeah, well, my box of 18 hard drives was quite heavy.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
It's like,
okay,
that's a lot of hard drives.
it is. Well, they're spinning metal, so yeah, it is. Oh, it's in there, Alan. It's in there. I don't know. It might not come out. It's stuck, Alan. I don't think I could get it out. It's stuck in there for good, Alan.
Normally, the best way to do it, especially when it's in the foam like that, is flip the box over and set it on the floor and then pull the box off
Yep.
of the appliance.
Exactly. Well, it was a little bit of a workout, Alan, but I got
Yeah.
it.
But, I remember I learned that when I worked at the power plant, we would get Compaq would send CRT monitors.
Yep.
So a 23-inch CRT monitor weighs enough that it takes two people to lift it.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like when it's time to take it out of the box, don't lean over the box that is like 2.5 feet tall and reach down and try to pull it because you're not going to be able to lift with your knees. What you do is you open the box, you flip it upside down, you pull the box off,
Yep.
and then you get the monitor
Absolutely.
out and it's upside down and you put it back together.
This thing is pretty heavy. It's a really dense, well-built thing. So here it is, Alan. Here is the now here. You know what? I'll turn my camera on for you. Wait for it.
Okay.
Wait for it. Okay. All right. So now the camera will be turned on, so you can see it too. And the front opens up, and then in there is where all the drives are. Is right there.
Nice.
So it's got a system drive, and then it's got these 4 drives right here. And
Yeah.
so there you go. Yeah, you can see it's about the size of a shuttle PC, and it
yeah.
has all your standard ports on the back.
It looks a lot like the shuttle PC that I had when I was in college.
Yep.
It looks like a standard like 1U server power supply.
And it has eSATA on the back, USB, HDMI out, which is kind of interesting, and a bunch of other little things on there. And of course, it's got gigabit Ethernet. So
1 or 2?
Only one. However, it has a PCI Express slot open. So there's one slot. You can put one standard PCI Express card in there. So I don't know what I'm going to put in there yet. Maybe another RAID controller, maybe a FireWire controller for some FireWire drives I have for backup. I don't know for sure,
Yep.
but something. Boy, I'm all warm. Between that and the hot studio, I got my workout today, Al. Whew, good thing they sent all these guides in here so I can fan myself.
Yes.
All right. Well, there
Yes,
you go.
It looks like a nice machine.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to setting it up and see like how loud it is and see what the performance
I'll have
is.
to show off the one I'm going to build for my house.
Yeah.
It won't be server hardware mostly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the case I've picked out has a hot swap 2.5-inch bay in the front where you
Nice.
just stick an SSD in the front of it and you can just pull it out kind of thing.
Nice. Very
Basically
cool.
treat an SSD like it was a USB stick.
Oh, the specs. The chat room is asking what the specs are. So
Yeah,
it's a
I'm
Core
interested.
it's a Core i3 something. One of the mid-level Core i3s, and it's got 8 gigs of RAM, which are kind of the key stats, and then of course those hot swap drive bays, and an OS drive in there too. So
Yeah.
there you go. And
I guess
I'll
that's
set
something
it all-
I talked a bit more about with my storage servers. Yeah, it has on top of the 8 hot swap bays, mine had 2 cold swap bays for setting up the
Very
OS
nice.
drives.
Very nice.
And then in the one, you pull out the CD-ROM drive and put in this other metal bracket they give you that fits in the slot, and it gives you a 2.5-inch slot for an SSD for if you're going to have if you're doing ZFS. When you got the 8 drives, you want an SSD for your ZIL.
Exactly. And lots of memory too. So
Yes.
all right, Alan.
18 RAM slots, which I'm going to fill with 8 gigabyte modules.
Attaboy, attaboy. That's Dylan. Dylan's saying hi to the internet. All right, Alan. Well, so we are live over at jblive.tv every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern or 2000 UTC.
There you go. And you can tune in and get in our chat room and leave your comments as you're watching the show live. And then we do release it for download just a couple hours later, usually in just about any format or resolution you could possibly want over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And Alan's fantastic show notes are also available there. Say goodbye to the internet, Dylan.
Bye, Internet.
Bye, Internet.
Bye.
Bye, Internet.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you next week.